One of my favorite stories to tell is the one I can start with, "My family left me to die in the woods." I always get an interested-looking response from whoever is listening or close by. When I was 16, I went with my family to the Rocky Mountains for a holiday. We went to the same cabins every year. They were so charming and were exactly what you pictured your typical cabin in the mountains would look like. It was an A-frame with a loft room upstairs with 2 beds. That's where me and my brother slept. Finn was 3 years older than me and was a bit of a jerk. He had his decent moments and times when we got along well enough, but generally speaking, he wasn't the kindest to me and never had been. Our cabin had all the comforts of home with a few extras: wood-burning fireplace, a balcony with a mountain view, and an outdoor hot tub that was to die for. I thought the area was one of the prettiest around. I couldn't understand why they wouldn't have pretty flowers planted around all the cabins, or at least some planters. I asked one of the housekeeping staff one day, and she explained that it was because the deer or other wild animals would just eat them. They had tried year after year, all different kinds of flowers, and as fast as they could replace them, they'd be nibbled off again. Still, it was a very pretty place. The cabin resort backed onto a mountain, locally known as Dee's Peak. It was called that by those who knew the old story of a hiker by the name of Darren Paggs from nearly 30 years before. This guy had hiked the mountain himself and had a tumble on his way down. He had survived on that mountain on his own with a broken leg for 2 weeks before some hikers discovered and rescued him. He was a local legend. Planning to hike and descend the mountain on the same day, he had only basic supplies with him for a day's journey. He was quickly out of water and food and had to forage the surrounding forest for sources of sustenance and water. He could barely move because of his broken leg, which he had managed to splint using some rope and thick branches he had found close by. He lived off berries and squirrel he had managed to snare in a rustic trap he had set. Darren had written a book about his survival experience and had become a bit of a minor celebrity. Anyway, his story and the mountain's history only enriched the charm of the area and local mountain town. On day 3 of our holiday, my parents announced we were climbing Dee's Peak as a family. We were taking overnight stuff so we could camp out on the mountain's peak and hike down the next morning. The plan sounded crazy to me, especially with the mountain's dubious history looming in my background thoughts. Still, I had been telling myself lately that I needed to loosen up and be more adventurous. So here was my chance. My bro and I packed our backpacks in our loft and talked about what the next couple of days would be like. Our parents were super happy and at times a little too affectionate for our liking. We each had our own tent to carry, but the thought of having our tents set up even within an earshot of my parents was not appealing at all. Anyway, we laughed it off and hoped we could find a wide clearing somewhere so we could space our tents far away from theirs. The day started out great. We packed our lunches, something for dinner, sleeping bags and tents, and were on our way. The weather was perfect. The sun was shining through the leaves on the trees, and the wildflowers were gently dancing in the wind. The scenery was breathtaking. I wondered why we had never climbed this peak before, but then realized it was likely because, as the youngest member of the tribe, they had to wait for me to be old enough. It was strenuous. Hiking straight up a mountain is hard work. Who would have thought? About halfway, we found a pretty clearing with a babbling brook and a nice view. We stopped for lunch and to admire our surroundings. The air just seemed cleaner and easier to breathe. I had always loved the outdoors, but still, the Dee's Peak legacy kept creeping back into my thoughts. As we approached the top of the mountain as the sun went down, we saw the most stunning sunset I think I'll ever see. It was every possible shade of pink and even some streaks of purple. It was like something out of a Bible story. After the beauty of the sunset faded, my mind turned to business. How was I going to get a spot in this tiny clearing far enough from everyone so I didn't have to hear my brother's snoring and my parents making their love sounds? It didn't seem possible. Even with each of us at the 3 corners of the triangle clearing, we were still within 5 feet of each other. Great, I thought. This is going to be one long night on the mountaintop. I decided to make the best of it and chalk it up as part of the experience. We had a campfire after we had all set up our tents and enjoyed the warmth and burnt marshmallows it brought us. With my belly full of hot dogs, hot chocolate, and way too many marshmallows, I decided to retire into the comfort of my tent. Everyone else did the same shortly after me. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, my brother starts snoring. He was the worst, loudest, most annoying sleeper in the world. He happened to be the world's deepest sleeper too, so no matter how hard you tried to wake him up to stop snoring, he would never wake up and you just end up more frustrated and tired than before. Shortly after that, I could hear the rustling of sleeping bags coming from my parents' tent and gentle moans. Ugh, I thought. This just keeps getting better and better. Half an hour in, I couldn't stand it anymore. I crawled out of my warm sleeping bag and got dressed to go out into the cold, dark night. I rolled up my stuff, quietly took down my tent, and decided I would find my own quiet spot elsewhere. There was no way I could lie there all night listening to all that. My brother was the world's deepest sleeper, and sadly, I was the world's lightest sleeper. I had my caving light on my head so I could see where I was going. I found my way to the path and started heading down it. I had recalled seeing a smaller clearing not far off the path and thought I could camp there for the night and return before anyone woke and saw I was gone. I couldn't help but become distracted by the beauty of the night. It was silent, except for all the mysterious rustling sounds in the leaves and trees. There were even northern lights out, and that's what really messed me up. They were so beautiful and were one of my favorite things to see. I wanted to veer off path to find a ridge or peak that I could admire the lights over the valley better. I headed off the path and found just the type of spot I wanted. I could see the huge sky all around me, the valley below, and the dancing lights above. I decided to set up my tent right there. Besides, I wasn't entirely sure how far I veered off the path and thought it might be better to try and find my way back in the light. I had one of the best sleeps of my entire life that night. I fell asleep to the sounds of leaves rustling in the trees and bat wings flapping overhead. When I woke up the next morning, I couldn't believe how late it was. I don't know if it was all the exercise or the fresh mountain air, but I had slept in until 10:30, later than I had slept in my entire life. I hurried to pack up my things and find my family. They would be confused at the very least and likely freaking out with worry and panic. I headed back down to the path, but as I got there, I had to ask myself which direction I had come from. The path forked, and for some reason, I could not remember which path was the one back to the clearing my parents and brother were at. I picked the wrong one, but still managed to find my way back to the campsite many, many hours later. When I got there, my mouth dropped open. They were gone! My family had left me in the woods to die, was how I saw it. They knew I had no outdoor skills. How dare they just abandon me? I stomped around for a moment or two before I decided to head down on my own. The idea didn't thrill me as it was getting dark again, but I had little choice. Halfway down, I heard familiar voices. My parents and brother were calling out my name. As it turns out, they hadn't left me in the woods to die after all. They had spent the whole time I was missing searching desperately for me, and couldn't be happier to have found me. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button. And tell us in the comments section what you thought about this story.